The phone slipped from my weathered fingers when I heard Michael's voice through the speaker. Dad's completely lost it, Jessica. He's still talking about rocket engines like it's 1975. The man doesn't even know how to use Netflix properly. My son's laughter cut through the static connection, sharp and dismissive. We need to face reality. He's old, he's stupid, and he's becoming a liability. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen in my Huntsville kitchen, staring at the wall where Dorothy's NASA Distinguished Service Medal hung in its mahogany frame. The same medal she'd received for her contributions to the Space Shuttle program. The same program where I'd spent 32 years of my life designing propulsion systems that carried astronauts safely to orbit and back. The irony wasn't lost on me that my own son, sitting in his glass-walled Austin office, was discussing my mental capacity while I held a secure line connection that he'd apparently forgotten to properly disconnect. Frank Morrison, outdated, Michael continued, his voice dripping with the kind of Silicon Valley arrogance he'd developed since founding his tech startup. Do you know he still uses a flip phone? Still writes everything in those ancient engineering notebooks with actual pencils? I visited last month and caught him trying to explain orbital mechanics to the neighbor's kid using a tennis ball and a flashlight. Jessica's voice joined the conversation, smooth and calculated. Honey, your father worked for NASA 40 years ago. Technology has moved on. SpaceX is launching rockets with touchscreen controls now. Everything's automated, computerized. His knowledge is basically antique information. The words hit me like a failed rocket test, explosive and devastating. I set my coffee mug down with trembling hands, the ceramic clicking against the Formica countertop that Dorothy and I had installed together in 1987. The same countertop where we'd celebrated every successful launch, every mission milestone, every promotion that had taken me from junior propulsion engineer to senior systems architect at Marshall Space Flight Center. I walked to my study, past the living room where framed photographs chronicled 3 decades of American space exploration. There I was, young and confident, standing beside the massive F-1 engines that would power Apollo missions to the moon. Another photo showed me with my team after the first space shuttle launch, our faces glowing with pride and exhaustion. A third captured the moment President Reagan had shaken my hand after the Challenger investigation, thanking our team for our dedication to making space travel safer. Michael's voice continued through the phone, unaware that his outdated father was listening to every word. The house is worth at least $400,000 now, maybe more with Huntsville's aerospace boom. But honestly, I don't think he can maintain it much longer. Last time I was there, he'd forgotten to pay the electric bill for 2 months, just sitting in the dark, probably trying to calculate rocket trajectories with a slide rule. I hadn't forgotten to pay the electric bill. I'd been traveling the conferences, consulting with private aerospace companies who still valued experience over flashy presentations. But Michael wouldn't know that because he never bothered to ask about my current activities. To him, retirement meant mental decline and irrelevance. There's this amazing assisted living facility in Austin, Vista Gardens. It's got all the amenities, 24-hour care, and most importantly, it's close enough that we can keep an eye on him. Plus, if we sell the house in Huntsville, the proceeds would more than cover the cost for several years. Keep an eye on me. As if I were a confused child rather than a man who'd helped design the systems that put Americans on the moon and brought them home safely.
I thought about the dozens of young engineers who still sought my advice, the patents that bore my name, the propulsion problems that had stumped NASA teams until they brought their blueprints to my workshop. My workshop. That's where the real pain hit me. Michael and Jessica were planning to liquidate my life's work so they could warehouse me in some sterile facility where I'd be surrounded by people who genuinely had lost their faculties. They wanted to strip away my independence, my tools, my purpose, and reduce me to a manageable monthly expense. The best part is, he'll probably be grateful, Michael said with that casual cruelty that comes from viewing people as problems to be solved. You know how Dad is. He'll see it as us taking care of him, being responsible children. He won't even realize we're basically putting him out to pasture. I realized I was gripping Dorothy's photograph so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. She'd been gone 3 years now, cancer taking her with the same ruthless efficiency she'd once applied to mission planning. In our final days together, she'd made me promise to stay sharp, stay engaged, keep contributing. "Frank," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above the hospital machines, "don't let them treat you like you're finished just because you've got gray hair. You've got more knowledge in your little finger than most of these young hotshots have in their entire careers." I'd promised her I wouldn't fade away quietly. I'd promised to keep fighting for what mattered. But here was my own son, my flesh and blood, planning to discard me like an obsolete computer system. "When do you think we should broach the subject?" Jessica asked. "I mean, how do you tell someone their independent living days are over?" "Carefully," Michael replied. "We don't want him to get stubborn about it. Maybe we start by suggesting he needs more help around the house, work our way up to the bigger conversation. The key is making him think it's partly his idea." Manipulation. Pure, calculated manipulation. They were going to gaslight me into believing I needed supervision, needed management, needed to be tucked away where I wouldn't embarrass them with my antiquated knowledge and old-fashioned ways. I walked through my house with fresh eyes, seeing it as Michael and Jessica saw it. The walls lined with technical manuals and aerospace journals, the dining room table covered with blueprints and engineering sketches, the coffee table stacked with trade publications and conference proceedings. To them, it probably looked like the cluttered den of a man who couldn't let go of the past. To me, it was a working laboratory where innovation continued to happen. In my workshop behind the garage, I kept the tools that had helped solve problems worth millions of dollars. CAD software might have replaced drafting tables in most places, but sometimes the best solutions still emerged from pencil sketches and hands-on prototyping. I had contracts with 3 private space companies, consulting agreements that brought in more money each year than Michael probably realized. But he'd never asked about my finances, just assumed that a retiree must be struggling. The phone conversation continued, Michael and Jessica working out logistics like military strategists planning an invasion. They discussed timelines and talking points, financial arrangements and legal considerations. They spoke about me as if I were already dead, just a collection of assets and liabilities to be managed efficiently. "I'll fly down next weekend, start the conversation about getting him some help, plant the seeds. If we're lucky, we can have this wrapped up before summer." Before summer. They wanted to complete my obliteration before the season when my garden would bloom with the flowers Dorothy had planted, before the warm evenings when I still sat on the porch swing we'd assembled together, thinking through engineering problems and watching the stars emerge over Rocket City. The line went dead, leaving me alone in my kitchen with the weight of their betrayal settling around my shoulders like a lead blanket.
But as I stood there, surrounded by the evidence of a lifetime spent pushing the boundaries of human achievement, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and immediate, but underneath it, something harder was forming. Michael thought I was old and stupid. Jessica thought my knowledge was antique. They both believed I was a problem to be managed rather than a resource to be valued. They had no idea that 3 months ago, NASA had quietly reached out through back channels, asking if I'd be willing to consult on a critical propulsion issue that had stumped their current team of brilliant young engineers. I'd been considering the offer, wondering if I still had the energy for another big project. Now suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. If my son wanted to treat me like a relic, I'd show him just how relevant this relic could be. If he thought my expertise was worthless, I'd demonstrate its value in terms even his spreadsheet-obsessed mind could understand. Dorothy's metal caught the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, casting tiny rainbows across the wall. I could almost hear her voice, proud and encouraging. "Show them what you're made of, Frank. Show them what happens when you underestimate a Morrison." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd been debating whether to call. Dr. Sarah Chen, Mission Director for the Artemis Lunar Program. The woman who'd been trying to convince me for 3 months that NASA needed my expertise for their next-generation propulsion challenges. Time to make that call. Time to remind everyone, starting with my son, that Frank Morrison wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The morning after Michael's devastating phone call, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by 3 decades of memories that suddenly felt like evidence in a trial where I was both defendant and judge. The familiar smell of machine oil and metal shavings couldn't quite mask the bitter taste of betrayal that had lingered since yesterday evening. I pulled out the thick manila folder labeled Personal Projects and began spreading its contents across my workbench like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to see. The receipts told a story I'd never bothered to tally before. Michael's undergraduate degree at Georgia Tech, $47,000 over 4 years. I remembered working double shifts at NASA, taking on extra consulting projects, selling Dorothy's beloved Buick so we could afford his tuition without taking loans. Dorothy had kissed my forehead one night as I calculated numbers at this very workbench, whispering, "Our boy is going to change the world, Frank. All this sacrifice will be worth it." The wedding expenses were itemized in my careful engineer's handwriting. $38,000 for 1 weekend in the hill country outside Austin. Michael had insisted on having the ceremony at some exclusive vineyard, claiming it would impress Jessica's family and his business connections. I'd liquidated my retirement stock options to pay for flowers and photographers, a string quartet, and an open bar that served champagne I couldn't pronounce. During the father-son dance, Michael had leaned close and said, "Dad, you've given me everything. I'll never forget this." But he had forgotten, hadn't he? Just like he'd forgotten who co-signed his first business loan when his credit score wasn't high enough to secure startup funding. Just like he'd forgotten who'd spent 2 weeks in Austin helping him move into his first apartment, assembling furniture and fixing leaky faucets while he networked at tech lead-ups. I found the bank statements from 5 years ago when Next Gen Solutions had nearly collapsed during a funding crisis. Michael had called me at 2 in the morning, his voice cracking with desperation. "Dad, I need help. If I don't make payroll by Friday, I'll lose everything." I'd wired him $60,000 from my emergency fund, money Dorothy and I had saved for medical expenses and home repairs, money I'd never asked him to repay because family doesn't keep scorecards. The pattern was clear now, spread across my workbench in black and white. Every major milestone in Michael's life had been subsidized by Frank Morrison, the man who was now too old and stupid to deserve basic respect. Every achievement he celebrated had been built on the foundation of my labor, my sacrifice, my belief in his potential. But it wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the dismissal of everything I'd accomplished, everything I still contributed. 3 months ago, Dr. Elizabeth Warren from the University of Alabama had contacted me about a propulsion efficiency problem that was stumping her graduate students. I'd spent a weekend in my workshop, sketching solutions and running calculations, then delivered a presentation that had solved a problem worth millions in research funding. Last year, Orbital Dynamics had paid me $75,000 to consult on their new rocket engine design, work that had taken me 6 weeks and resulted in 2 patent applications with my name on them. Michael knew none of this because he'd never bothered to ask. In his mind, retirement meant irrelevance, and age meant obsolescence. He saw my workshop as the cluttered cave of a man who couldn't let go of the past, not recognizing it as the laboratory where innovation continued to happen. I walked through my house with new awareness, seeing it through the lens of Michael's contempt. The living room walls displayed my career achievements,
Commendation letters from NASA administrators, photographs with astronauts whose lives had depended on my work, certificates of achievement for propulsion systems that had performed flawlessly in the vacuum of space. To Michael, these were probably just old man trophies, meaningless decorations from an era he considered technologically primitive. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer where I kept correspondence from current projects. 3 private aerospace companies were still seeking my expertise on various challenges. Blue Origin had sent me specifications for a lunar lander propulsion system they couldn't get right. Virgin Galactic wanted my input on fuel efficiency modifications. SpaceX, despite their reputation for innovation, had quietly reached out through intermediaries about a combustion stability problem that was costing them millions in delayed launches. The irony was devastating. While my son dismissed me as technologically obsolete, the most advanced aerospace companies in the world were still knocking on my door. While he mocked my antique knowledge, billion-dollar enterprises were willing to pay premium rates for access to my experience. I thought about Dorothy, about the conversations we'd had during her final months. She'd worried about Michael's growing arrogance, his tendency to value innovation over wisdom, his habit of discarding anything that seemed outdated. "That boy thinks newer always means better," she'd said one evening as we watched the sunset from our porch swing. "He's forgotten that some knowledge only comes with time, that experience is irreplaceable." She'd been right, as she usually was. Michael had embraced the Silicon Valley mentality that treated anyone over 50 as deadweight, that confused technological fluency with genuine intelligence. He could navigate touchscreen interfaces and manage cloud-based systems, but he'd never spent sleepless nights calculating thrust-to-weight ratios for missions where human lives hung in the balance. He'd never felt the crushing responsibility of knowing that a single miscalculation could result in astronauts dying in the cold vacuum of space. The most painful part was remembering the young man who'd once idolized my work. At 8 years old, Michael would sit in this workshop for hours, asking endless questions about rocket engines and orbital mechanics. He'd help me build model rockets, his small hands carefully measuring black powder charges while I explained the principles of propulsion. When the Challenger disaster happened, he'd found me crying in this same workshop and asked if the astronauts had suffered. I'd explained the technical details of the solid rocket booster failure, and he'd listened with the intensity of someone who understood that engineering wasn't just mathematics and physics, but moral responsibility. Somewhere along the way, that curious, respectful child had transformed into a man who viewed his father as an embarrassing relic. The tech world had taught him to worship disruption over continuity, to celebrate the new while discarding the proven. He'd forgotten that the smartphone in his pocket depended on satellite technology I'd helped develop, that his precious SpaceX rockets used propulsion principles I'd refined decades before Elon Musk was born. The cruelest part of his dismissal was how wrong he was about my technological adaptability. I might prefer my flip phone, but I understood computer-aided design better than most of his employees. I might write in notebooks, but I'd been using simulation software since before Microsoft Windows existed. I wasn't afraid of new technology. I simply knew when old methods were more reliable than flashy alternatives. My consulting work proved this every day. Young engineers would arrive at my workshop with computer models and simulation results, convinced they had solved problems that had actually stumped them for months. I'd listen patiently, then show them where their elegant digital solutions failed to account for real-world physics. Usually within an hour, we'd identify issues their software had missed, problems that could only be caught by someone who'd seen similar failures in actual flight hardware. But Michael would never know about any of this because he'd already decided I was irrelevant. He'd convinced himself that my value had expired along with my active employment, that retirement meant mental decline rather than freedom to pursue more interesting challenges. I found myself standing in Dorothy's garden, where her roses were beginning to bloom despite 3 years without her careful tending. She'd planted these bushes when we first moved to Rocket Avenue, nurturing them through Alabama's unpredictable weather until they'd become the most beautiful display in the neighborhood. Even now, they continued to thrive because she'd built something lasting, something that didn't require constant management. That's what Michael couldn't understand. Real expertise wasn't like software that became obsolete with each new version. Knowledge accumulated, deepened, became more valuable with age and experience. The principles I'd learned designing Apollo-era engines were still relevant to modern propulsion systems because the laws of physics hadn't changed. The problem-solving methods I'd developed over 3 decades were still applicable because human nature and engineering challenges followed predictable patterns. Standing among Dorothy's roses, I realized that Michael's betrayal had revealed something important. I'd been living like a man whose life was finished instead of like someone with decades of valuable contributions ahead of him. I'd been so focused on maintaining my home and preserving memories that I'd stopped actively building my future. But I wasn't finished, not even close. And maybe it was time to remind everyone, starting with my ungrateful son, exactly what Frank Morrison was still capable of achieving. The morning light filtered through my workshop windows as I sat staring at Dr. Sarah Chen's business card, its edges worn from 3 months of handling. The NASA logo seemed to pulse with possibility, a reminder that while my son saw obsolescence, the nation's premier space agency saw opportunity. I'd been hesitating to call her back, comfortable in my routine of small consulting projects and quiet retirement, but Michael's words had changed everything. If he wanted to treat me like a has-been, perhaps it was time to show him what this has-been could still accomplish. I dialed the number with steady fingers, my heart rate climbing like a rocket approaching escape velocity. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Dr. Chen's office, this is Maria speaking. This is Frank Morrison.
Dr. Chen asked me to call her about the Artemis propulsion consultation. Mr. Morrison, Dr. Chen has been hoping to hear from you. Let me connect you immediately. The brief hold music was interrupted by Sarah Chen's voice, warm with genuine enthusiasm. Frank, I was beginning to think you'd decided we weren't worth your time. Just the opposite, Dr. Chen. I've been considering whether I'm worth yours. Her laugh was immediate and authentic. Frank, you designed the backup propulsion systems that saved Apollo 13. You solved the combustion instability problems that were plaguing the shuttle program. Trust me, we know exactly what you're worth. We talked for 45 minutes about the specific challenges facing the Artemis program. The new lunar lander required propulsion systems that could operate reliably in the moon's harsh environment while meeting strict weight limitations and fuel efficiency requirements. 3 separate NASA teams had been working on the problem for 18 months, burning through budgets and missing deadlines while the solution remained elusive. The theoretical models look perfect, Sarah explained, her frustration evident. Computer simulations show optimal performance, but when we test the actual hardware, we're getting combustion irregularities that shouldn't exist according to our calculations. I found myself leaning forward, my engineering instincts fully engaged. What's the chamber pressure variation during sustained burns? Between 8 and 12%, but the simulations predict less than 3% variation. And you're using the new titanium-aluminum composite for the combustion chamber walls. How did you know that? Because I've seen this problem before. The thermal expansion coefficients in your models probably assume uniform heating, but composite materials create micro-temperature gradients that affect fuel injection patterns. Your simulations can't account for real-world metallurgical variations. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Then Sarah spoke, her voice carrying a mixture of amazement and relief. Frank, our teams have been focusing on fuel mixture ratios and injection timing. Nobody even considered the chamber wall material interactions. That's because your teams learned engineering from computers instead of hardware. No offense to your brilliant young people, but there's no substitute for having actually watched metal behave under extreme conditions. We discussed technical details for another hour, my excitement building as I realized how much I'd missed this kind of deep engineering problem-solving. Sarah's questions were intelligent and probing, and I found myself sketching solutions on napkins while we talked, my mind racing through possibilities I hadn't considered in months. Frank, I need you on this project. We've got congressional oversight breathing down our necks, international partners waiting for delivery schedules, and astronauts whose lives will depend on getting this right. Name your terms. The number that came out of my mouth surprised even me. $200,000 for a 6-month consultation, plus full access to your test facilities and manufacturing specifications. Done. When can you start? Monday morning. After hanging up, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by 30 years of accumulated knowledge, feeling more alive than I had since Dorothy's funeral. The technical challenge excited me. But more than that, I was energized by the recognition of my continued relevance. While Michael planned to warehouse me in an assisted living facility, NASA was offering me the chance to help Americans return to the moon. I spent the weekend preparing for what felt like the most important project of my career. Not because the technical challenges were unprecedented, but because this project would demonstrate once and for all that Frank Morrison remained a force to be reckoned with in the aerospace industry. Sunday evening, I called my attorney, Patricia Williams, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd handled Dorothy's estate planning with precision and compassion. "Frank, good to hear from you. How are you holding up?"
Better than expected, actually. Patricia, I need to discuss some financial planning. I'm about to start a significant consulting contract with NASA, and I want to make sure my affairs are properly organized. We spent an hour discussing trust structures and estate planning modifications. Patricia asked probing questions about my intentions and my family situation, her legal mind clearly sensing there was more to this conversation than simple financial planning. "Frank, are you expecting some kind of family conflict over your assets?" "Let's just say I want to ensure my resources are protected from anyone who might question my mental competency." Patricia's tone sharpened with professional interest. "Has someone suggested you lack capacity to manage your own affairs?" I told her about Michael's phone call, about his plans to move me to assisted living and sell my house. Patricia listened with the focused attention of someone who'd seen the scenario play out too many times. "Frank, adult children sometimes forget that aging doesn't automatically equal incompetence. Your decision-making authority remains intact until a court determines otherwise. And from this conversation, you sound sharper than most of my clients half your age." "I want legal protection in place before Michael makes his move." "Absolutely. I'll prepare documentation establishing your continued mental competency along with powers of attorney that protect your interests. Given your new NASA contract, we'll also want to structure your finances to demonstrate ongoing professional relevance." Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of Alabama spring day that made Rocket City feel like the center of the universe. I dressed in my best suit, the same navy blue ensemble I'd worn to congressional hearings during my active NASA career. Looking in the mirror, I saw not the confused old man Michael imagined, but a professional who still commanded respect in the most demanding industry in the world. The drive to Marshall Space Flight Center took me through neighborhoods where I'd lived and worked for 3 decades, past the elementary school where Michael had learned about space exploration during career day presentations I'd given, past the restaurant where Dorothy and I had celebrated every successful launch, past the community center where I'd taught evening classes on rocket science to curious neighbors and aspiring engineers. This wasn't just a return to NASA, it was a homecoming to the place where my expertise had been forged and refined. The security guard at the main gate recognized my name on the visitors list and smiled warmly. "Frank Morrison. Sir, my supervisor told me you were coming back. It's an honor to meet you. My dad worked on the shuttle program and always talked about your propulsion designs." Inside the main complex, Sarah Chen met me personally, her enthusiasm immediately putting me at ease. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the confident bearing of someone who'd earned respect through competence rather than politics. "Frank, welcome back to Marshall. Ready to solve some impossible problems?" The laboratory was a temple to precision engineering, filled with test stands and measurement equipment that represented millions of dollars in scientific capability. Young engineers worked at computer terminals, their screens displaying complex simulations and performance data. But their expressions showed the frustration of people who'd reached the limits of their theoretical knowledge. Sarah introduced me to the team, 8 brilliant men and women with advanced degrees from prestigious universities.
Their respect was immediate and genuine when they learned who I was, their handshakes firm, and their questions insightful. These weren't the arrogant young know-it-alls Michael had described. These were serious professionals who understood the value of experience. "Mr. Morrison," said Dr. James Park, the lead propulsion engineer, "we've been struggling with this combustion stability problem for over a year. Your reputation for solving impossible challenges is legendary around here."
I spent the morning reviewing their test data, examining hardware samples, and listening to detailed presentations about their approaches and failures. By lunchtime, I'd identified 3 potential solutions that their computer models had missed, problems that could only be recognized by someone who'd seen similar failures in actual flight hardware. "The issue isn't just the composite chamber walls," I explained to the assembled team. "You're dealing with fuel injection pressure variations caused by gravitational effects that your simulations assume away. On Earth, fuel flows differently than it will in lunar gravity. Your injection patterns are optimized for terrestrial testing, but will fail in the actual operating environment." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Months of testing had been conducted under conditions that didn't match the actual mission requirements. A fundamental oversight that computer modeling had missed, but practical experience could identify immediately. "How do we fix it?" Sarah asked. "We build a test rig that simulates lunar gravity effects, then redesign the injection system accordingly. I can have preliminary sketches ready by tomorrow morning." As the team dispersed to begin implementing my recommendations, Sarah walked me to her office, her expression mixing relief with amazement. "Frank, in one morning, you've identified problems that stumped our entire team for over a year. I knew you were good, but this is remarkable." "Sarah, this is what experience looks like. Your people are brilliant, but they've learned engineering from textbooks and simulations. I learned it from failures and explosions and systems that had to work perfectly or astronauts died." That evening, I drove home through the familiar streets of Huntsville with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, probably Michael trying to reach me through some new method. I ignored it and turned off the phone completely. Let him wonder where his old, stupid father had disappeared to. Let him worry about why I wasn't answering his calls or responding to his messages. While he plotted to liquidate my assets and warehouse me in assisted living, I was busy proving that Frank Morrison still had rockets to build and problems to solve. The game had changed, and he had no idea what he was up against. 3 weeks into the NASA project, my workshop had transformed into Mission Control Central. The dining room table where Dorothy and I used to share quiet breakfasts now hosted blueprints and technical specifications for the most ambitious lunar mission since Apollo. My phone rang constantly with calls from engineers at Marshall, private aerospace contractors, and even international space agencies who'd heard about the breakthrough solutions emerging from Frank Morrison's garage laboratory. The propulsion system redesign was exceeding everyone's expectations. My lunar gravity simulation recommendations had solved the combustion instability problems that had plagued the project for over a year. More importantly, the modifications were actually improving overall engine efficiency by 12%, a development that would save NASA millions in fuel costs and extend mission capabilities beyond original specifications. Sarah Chen had called me twice this week just to express her amazement at the progress. "Frank, the preliminary test results are beyond anything we hoped for. The administrator wants to meet with you next month about expanding your role in the Artemis program. We're talking about a multi-year contract worth potentially 7 figures." 7 figures. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Michael plotted to liquidate my assets and warehouse me in assisted living, NASA was preparing to offer me the most lucrative consulting contract of my entire career. The money was gratifying, but the recognition meant more. At 72 years old, I wasn't just relevant, I was indispensable.
My bank account at Tennessee Valley Community Bank had swollen beyond anything I'd ever imagined possible. The initial NASA payment of $100,000 had cleared, followed by performance bonuses for ahead-of-schedule deliverables. Blue Origin had sent a check for $60,000 after implementing my recommendations on their lunar lander project. Virgin Galactic wanted to retain me for ongoing consulting at $30,000 per month. But the real validation came from the young engineers who sought me out for guidance. Dr. Park had taken to stopping by my house on weekends, bringing technical problems and staying for hours to discuss solutions over coffee and Dorothy's leftover cookies. Maria Santos from the propulsion lab had asked me to review her doctoral dissertation on advanced rocket nozzle designs. These brilliant young professionals treated me not as a relic from NASA's past, but as an active contributor to its future. The contrast with Michael's perception couldn't have been starker. While he dismissed me as technologically obsolete, I was using cutting-edge computer modeling software to solve problems his generation couldn't crack. While he mocked my antique knowledge, billion-dollar space programs were depending on my expertise to succeed. I'd been careful to document everything for Patricia Williams. Bank statements, contract agreements, correspondence with NASA administrators, performance reviews from project supervisors. The legal paper trail clearly established my continued mental acuity and professional relevance, creating an unshakable foundation for challenging any competency claims Michael might attempt. My phone buzzed with another call from an Austin area code. Michael had been trying to reach me for 2 weeks, his messages growing increasingly frustrated and demanding. I'd listened to a few of his voicemails, each one confirming that he had no idea about my new circumstances. "Dad, I've been trying to call you for days. I'm coming to visit this weekend so we can discuss some important changes. Please call me back immediately." Changes, as if my life were something he could modify without consultation, like updating software on his computer. He had no idea that Frank Morrison 2.0 was already running, performing better than the original version and generating more revenue than he'd ever imagined possible. I drove to Patricia Williams' office on Friday afternoon to finalize the legal protections we'd been crafting. Her reception area was decorated with framed photographs of successful cases and grateful clients, testimonials to her skill at protecting people's interests from family members who confused love with control. "Frank, everything's in order," Patricia said, spreading documents across her mahogany conference table. "We've established irrefutable documentation of your mental competency and professional activity. Your NASA contracts alone demonstrate cognitive function at the highest levels. Any attempt to claim diminished capacity would be laughable in court." She'd prepared comprehensive financial powers of attorney that protected my assets while ensuring I retained complete control over my decisions. A medical directive established my wishes regarding healthcare decisions, specifically prohibiting involuntary placement in care facilities without clear evidence of incapacity determined by independent medical evaluation. "Most importantly," Patricia continued, "we've structured your new income streams to demonstrate ongoing professional relevance. Your consulting contracts show increasing rather than declining mental capacity. Any court would recognize you as a highly functional professional, not someone requiring supervision." I signed the documents with steady hands, each signature another layer of armor against Michael's misguided intervention attempts. The legal protections cost me $12,000, money that would have seemed extravagant 6 months ago, but now represented a minor expense from my NASA consulting income.
Saturday morning arrived, overcast and humid. Typical Alabama spring weather that reminded me of launch days when weather conditions could make or break billion-dollar missions. I was reviewing propulsion test data in my workshop when I heard Michael's BMW pull into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him step out, wearing his standard uniform of pressed khakis and designer polo shirt, the casual professional look that helped him blend in at Austin networking events. He approached my front door with the confident stride of someone who believed he was in control of the situation. I let him ring the doorbell twice before answering, taking satisfaction in the slight frown that crossed his face when he realized I'd been home but hadn't rushed to greet him. "Dad, there you are. I've been trying to call you for 2 weeks." "Sorry, son, I've been busy with work projects." His expression shifted from annoyance to concern, the look he probably practiced for delivering bad news to business clients. "Dad, what kind of work projects? You're retired, remember?" I led him into the living room, where my NASA contracts and technical documents were spread across the coffee table, impossible to miss. Michael's eyes widened as he took in the official NASA letterhead, the technical drawings, the performance bonus checks visible among the paperwork.
What is all this? Consulting work. NASA hired me to solve some propulsion problems their regular teams couldn't handle. Michael picked up one of the contracts, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he read the payment terms and project descriptions. Dad, this says they're paying you $200,000. That's just the initial contract. There are performance bonuses and expansion possibilities. He stared at the documents as if they might be forgeries, his carefully prepared intervention speech clearly derailed by evidence that contradicted everything he had assumed about my mental state and professional relevance. But you're 72 years old. NASA doesn't hire retired people. They hire people who can solve problems, regardless of age. Experience turns out to be valuable even in the 21st century. I watched Michael process this information, his tech world assumptions colliding with aerospace industry reality. In Silicon Valley, anyone over 40 was considered past their prime. In rocket science, knowledge accumulated over decades was irreplaceable. This is wonderful, Dad, but we still need to talk about your living situation. There it was. Despite evidence of my continued professional success, he was still proceeding with his assisted living plan. In Michael's mind, age automatically equaled incompetence, regardless of contrary evidence. What about my living situation? Jessica and I have been researching senior communities in Austin. There's this amazing place called Vista Gardens, with full medical support and social activities. You'd love it there. Would I? Of course. No more worrying about maintaining this big house, no more isolation. You'd be around people your own age, with trained staff available 24 hours a day. I let him continue his sales pitch, describing amenities and services with the enthusiasm of someone who'd convinced himself he was offering a gift rather than proposing imprisonment. He talked about planned activities and medical monitoring, transportation services and meal programs, painting a picture of institutional care disguised as resort living. It sounds like you've put a lot of thought into this, Michael. We just want what's best for you, Dad. And honestly, with your NASA income, you could afford the premium accommodations. It would actually work out perfectly. There it was, the real motivation finally revealed. Not concern for my well-being, but excitement at accessing my increased income. He wasn't proposing to warehouse me despite my financial success. He was proposing it because of my financial success. What would happen to this house? Well, we'd sell it, of course. No point in maintaining it if you're living in Austin. The real estate market in Huntsville is really strong right now.
Michael outlined his plans with the efficiency of someone who'd been thinking about this for months. Sell the house, liquidate my possessions, move me to a controlled environment where my finances could be more easily managed. He spoke about my life as if it were a business portfolio requiring optimization. Have you discussed this with anyone else? Jessica and I have researched everything thoroughly. We've even visited Vista Gardens. The staff is wonderful, and they have experience with elderly residents who sometimes become confused about financial decisions. Confused about financial decisions. Despite the NASA contracts spread across my coffee table, despite evidence of my continued professional competence, Michael was still convinced that age meant cognitive decline. He couldn't reconcile his preconceptions with contradictory facts. I realized that no amount of evidence would change his fundamental assumptions about aging and relevance. He'd decided I needed management, and he was going to proceed with that plan, regardless of my actual capabilities or circumstances. When were you thinking this transition might happen? As soon as possible, really. I can take time off work to help with the move. We could have everything arranged within a month. Michael smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believed he was solving problems efficiently. He had no idea that his elderly father had been preparing for this conversation, that every detail of his intervention attempt had been anticipated and countered. It was time for Michael Morrison to learn that his old, stupid father was neither old nor stupid, and definitely not manageable. I walked to my home office and returned with a thick manila folder, setting it deliberately on the coffee table beside the NASA contracts.
Michael watched with growing unease as I opened it to reveal bank statements, legal documents, and correspondence that told a story he wasn't prepared to hear. Before we continue this conversation about my future son, I think you should understand my current situation more completely. The first document was my latest bank statement from Tennessee Valley Community Bank. Michael's eyes widened as he saw the balance. $437,000, an amount that had grown by over $300,000 in just 6 weeks. Dad, how is this possible? Professional consulting generates substantial income when you possess expertise that billion-dollar corporations actually need. I spread out contract agreements from Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, and SpaceX alongside the NASA documentation. It turns out that old, stupid knowledge is surprisingly valuable in the space industry. Michael's face went pale as he read the contract terms and payment schedules. Each document contradicted his fundamental assumptions about my mental state and professional relevance. His carefully prepared intervention speech was crumbling under the weight of evidence he couldn't dismiss or explain away. But Jessica and I researched Vista Gardens specifically for you. We've already put down a deposit, without consulting me about whether I wanted to live there. We thought you'd be grateful for our help managing these complex decisions. I pulled out the legal documents Patricia Williams had prepared, sliding them across the table for his examination. Michael, these are powers of attorney and competency declarations prepared by my attorney. They establish my continued mental capacity and specifically prohibit involuntary placement in care facilities. His hands trembled slightly as he read the legal language that destroyed any possibility of forcing me into assisted living. The documents were ironclad, prepared by someone who understood exactly what protections were needed against well-meaning but misguided family members. You hired a lawyer? I hired a lawyer because I overheard your phone conversation 3 weeks ago, the one where you and Jessica called me old and stupid, discussed selling my house, and planned to warehouse me in Austin so you could manage my assets more conveniently.
Michael's face went white. He set down the legal documents and stared at me with an expression mixing shock, embarrassment, and growing panic. Dad, you weren't supposed to hear that conversation. No. I imagine you weren't planning to let me hear you describe me as a burden who'd be grateful for any scraps of attention you threw my way. We never said you were a burden. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the audio recording I'd made during their call. Patricia Williams had suggested documenting everything, and my engineering background had taught me the value of preserving evidence. I played back Michael's voice, cold and calculating as it emerged from my phone speaker. He's old, he's stupid, and he's becoming a liability. The house is worth at least $400,000. We could sell it, put him somewhere decent, not too expensive, and finally get our lives back on track. Michael's face crumpled as he heard his own words played back to him. There was no denying what he'd said, no way to reframe his cruel assessment of his father's worth. Dad, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You meant exactly what you said, Michael. You saw me as a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated, an inconvenience to be managed efficiently. Jessica's voice joined the recording, equally callous in her calculations about my future. Michael listened in horror as his wife's laughter echoed through my living room, the sound of two people amused by their own cleverness in planning to deceive a trusting old man. The beautiful irony, I continued, turning off the recording, is that while you were plotting to steal my independence because you thought I was incompetent, NASA was offering me the most prestigious consulting contract of my entire career. I showed him the expansion proposal Sarah Chen had sent yesterday, a 3-year agreement worth $1.2 million to serve as senior advisor for the entire Artemis program. My signature was required by Monday morning if I chose to accept. They want me to relocate to Houston temporarily to work directly with mission control during the lunar landing phases. The space agency considers my expertise so valuable they're willing to provide housing, transportation, and full medical coverage for the duration of the contract. Michael stared at the NASA proposal as if it were written in a foreign language. Everything he'd assumed about aging and obsolescence was being systematically destroyed by evidence he couldn't dispute or dismiss. But you're retired. You're supposed to be slowing down, not taking on massive new projects. According to whom? You? The son who thinks expertise expires with age? Who confuses technological familiarity with genuine intelligence? I walked to the mantelpiece and took down Dorothy's NASA Distinguished Service Medal, holding it where the afternoon light caught the gold lettering. Your mother earned this medal for contributions to human spaceflight. She understood that knowledge accumulates rather than diminishes, that experience becomes more valuable over time, not less. Mom would want you to be safe and comfortable in your final years. Your mother would want me to keep contributing as long as I'm capable. She'd be appalled that her son tried to warehouse his father based on ageist assumptions and financial greed. The truth hung between us like toxic gas. Michael could no longer pretend his motives were purely altruistic. The Vista Gardens deposit, the house sale plans, the eager calculations about managing my assets, everything pointed to financial motivation disguised as filial concern. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now you learn what consequences look like when you underestimate Frank Morrison." I gathered up the contracts and legal documents, organizing them into neat piles. I'm accepting NASA's 3-year contract and relocating to Houston next month. What about the house? I'm keeping it. My attorney has prepared a will that leaves everything to the Challenger Center for Space Science Education. Upon my death, this house will become a scholarship fund for aspiring aerospace engineers.
Michael's face went ashen as he processed the implications. No inheritance, no house sale, no access to the money he'd been planning to manage. His intervention attempt had not only failed, but had resulted in permanent disinheritance. "Dad, surely we can work this out. I made a mistake, said things I didn't mean." "You meant every word, Michael. The only thing you regret is getting caught." I walked to my workshop and returned with a small cardboard box containing items I'd been saving for him. Model rockets we'd built together when he was 8 years old. Photos of us at NASA open houses and space camps. A handwritten letter he'd given me for Father's Day when he was 12, promising to make me proud by following in my footsteps. I kept these because I remembered the boy who wanted to be an astronaut, who thought his father was a hero for helping send people to the moon. That boy grew into a man who calls his father stupid and plots to steal his independence. Michael opened the box with trembling hands, his eyes filling with tears as he saw the artifacts of our relationship when it had been built on love and respect rather than contempt and greed. "I can change, Dad. I can be better." "Maybe you can, son. But trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. You'll have to prove your sincerity through actions, not words, and that process will take years, not minutes." I handed him a business card for a storage facility in Austin. "Your belongings from Vista Gardens deposit forfeiture have been relocated there. You have 30 days to claim them before storage fees begin accumulating." Michael stood slowly, the weight of his miscalculation evident in his defeated posture. He had entered my house confident he was managing an incompetent old man. He was leaving humbled by an aerospace professional whose career was experiencing unprecedented success. "Will I see you again?" "That depends entirely on whether you can learn to treat your father with the respect he's earned rather than the contempt you've shown." After Michael left, I sat in Dorothy's reading chair with her photograph in my hands, watching the sunset paint the Alabama sky in shades of gold and crimson. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen asking if I'd made my decision about the Houston contract. I typed my response with steady fingers. "Dr. Chen, please proceed with all arrangements. Frank Morrison accepts your offer and looks forward to helping return Americans to the moon." Tomorrow I would begin preparing for the next chapter of my career. At 72 years old, I wasn't just relevant, I was indispensable. And my ungrateful son had learned, too late, that you should never underestimate a man who helped build the rockets that carried humanity to the stars. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, each note a reminder that time hadn't diminished Frank Morrison's capabilities, it had only refined them.
Dorothy's metal caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through our windows, and I could almost hear her voice, proud and encouraging. Show them what you're made of, Frank. Show them what happens when you underestimate a Morrison. Mission accomplished. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.